Ukraine has confirmed it launched an overnight drone attack on a military airfield in Russia. The base is located about 300 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Russia is already fighting to push back an incursion closer to the frontier near Kursk. The Russian Defense Ministry says extra troops are being sent to the region. A state of emergency is in force.
Hoping to fend off Ukrainian troops. Russia's defense ministry says this footage shows Ukrainian armoured vehicles being destroyed as heavy fighting rages. An estimated 1,000 Ukrainian troops rammed through the Russian border early Tuesday into the Kursk region with tanks and other armoured vehicles. Heavy fighting was reported near the town of Sudzha, where Russian natural gas flows into Ukraine, raising concerns over a potential stop to transit flows to Europe. Ukraine has released video footage allegedly showing Russian guards surrendering at a border crossing in Kursk. In his evening address, President Volodymyr Zelensky suggested Russia should get a taste of its own medicine, without referring directly to the incident. Russia brought the war to our land and should feel what it has done. We want to achieve our goals as soon as possible, in peacetime, under the conditions of a just peace, and it will be. Kursk has declared a state of emergency and thousands of people are being evacuated. Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev reacted to the incursion on social media. This is no longer just an operation to reclaim our official territories and punish the Nazis. It is possible and necessary to enter the territory of the still existing Ukraine. To go into Odessa, Kharkiv, Dnipro, Mykolaiv, to go into Kiev and further, there should be no restrictions in the sense of any recognized border of the Ukrainian Reich. Moscow has been forced to call in reserves to stop Ukrainian soldiers from pushing deeper into its territory.
Nick Connolly is in Kyiv for us. Janina, Semenova in Riga, where our Moscow team relocated after Russia shut them down. Janina, starting with you, how is Moscow selling this obvious embarrassment in Kursk?
Yeah, we indeed see a bit of panic there among the Russian leadership. Putin just today held another meeting with his defense and security official. That was actually the third meeting within just a week. So there really seems to be this attempt to show that the situation is under control. We hear from the Kursk region that the region's acting governor has now called on people to refrain from posting on social media, so like photo and videos. And of course, that's really where a lot of us are getting the information from this region, basically social media, or we rely on what the Russian state is reporting there. So there seems to be a bit of an effort to hide what is actually going on. And DW actually managed to speak to locals in the Kursk region today, who of course remain anonymous, who are a bit further away from the fighting, so not really in that zone. But they said they don't really have an idea of the scale of what we are seeing from Kursk, the heavy fighting, etc. So yeah, a really different image there that is kind of sold to the Russian public.
And describe the general public reaction to these developments.
Well, we of course heard from regional authorities that there are evacuations going on, and we've pretty much seen people kind of contradicting that on social media, saying that the evacuations are not being organized, that they have to organize those evacuations themselves, and interestingly also really being angry about the Russian authorities there and kind of questioning that they have the situation under control. But of course, this is very limited information here, mostly from social media, and it is hard kind of because there are no independent journalists on the ground right now.
Nick, this is day 4 of the incursion. Where do you see it going?
I think right now the Ukrainians are trying to take as much ground as they can. This is basically opportunistic. They crossed the border and realized that there was even less in the way of Russian defenses there than maybe they had expected. When you look at the maps that various observers have put together, they are very different. Some are a lot more conservative and kind of put the zone of Ukrainian control basically just along the border, 10 kilometers deep. Others say that in certain points they've reached as far as 35 kilometers deep away from the border. There's talk of the Ukrainians maybe trying to take hold of the Kursk nuclear power station, which is further to the north, that this is some kind of thing that can be then exchanged, traded for control of Ukraine's biggest nuclear power station at Zaporizhzhia, which is held by the Russians right now. That still seems pretty far-fetched, but even a few days ago, we had no concept of this being something that could be longer term. We thought this would just be another border raid, something that would be over in 24, if not latest 48 hours. But it seems, according to some reports, that the Ukrainians are digging in and trying to hold on to this territory. So this is definitely something on a scale we haven't seen so far, and something that for the first time in probably more than a year has kind of successfully seemingly changed the rules of the game and really taken the Russian side by surprise.
And Nick, let's talk more about strategy. Is it drawing Russian forces away from eastern Ukraine?
I think in terms of boots on the ground in the east, that's probably a little early. These kinds of troop movements take a long time. Certainly there have been reports on Ukrainian social media, ones that we can't verify, obviously, that lots of helicopters that have been used, military helicopters used by the Russians more in Kharkiv region further east, that they were now being seen less often, that potentially they were being moved west to Kursk. We can't be sure if that's true, but certainly that is the big hope here, that this is going to take the pressure off at the front lines where Russia's been pushing forward pretty relentlessly in recent months. On top, obviously, of being a huge embarrassment for Vladimir Putin and really maybe hitting morale if people in the rest of Russia are really hearing about this and are being confronted with these images on social media rather than just hearing what the government is telling them. That is the big hope here, that this could really prove to Russians that this war in Ukraine has a higher price for them, that they can't ignore it and can't somehow live their lives in peace while this is going on.
Janina, you mentioned the sense of panic among Russian officials. Ukraine's still hitting other parts of Russia with drone attacks. What more can you tell us?
Oh yeah, actually, Ukraine has attacked Russian territory already before. We have been seeing the events in Kursk now, especially last year, especially in the Belgorod region. But of course, that was a different scale. And again, today there were reportedly drone attacks on the Belgorod region. And I mean, we didn't, because Nick mentioned that, we didn't really see much of a change. I mean, of course, it's kind of hard to assess right now, change in Russian public opinion because of restrictive laws, but still we didn't see this kind of change in public opinion, because that is an area that already has been attacked by drones last year and again now today. And we actually managed to speak to a resident in Belgorod. A colleague of mine spoke to her, and she said people pretty much got used to the drone attacks. So it's kind of, it didn't really change apparently their opinion towards the war. But they are now worried, people in Belgorod, that's what they are telling us, that there might be similar developments in Belgorod as in the Kursk region. So they're worried about troops advancing there. So I think that is just really an interesting question to see how this further advancing of Ukrainian troops will change Russian public opinion.
Nick, with all these reports of Ukrainian attacks on Russian territory in various regions, is Ukraine spreading itself too thin?
Well, look, we don't know how many resources, how many soldiers Ukraine has thrown at this endeavour. There were those Russian reports of 1,000 Ukrainian soldiers, more or less, crossing the border. That certainly seems pretty low given the size of the territory that we believe potentially has seen some kind of Ukrainian involvement or Ukrainian boots on the ground. There does seem to be also lots of moments where the Ukrainians will advance, will try and see where the Russian defences are, maybe engage in some firefights and then pull back. So maybe some of the kind of furthest dots on the map from the border, as it were, are just temporary and don't represent the places where Ukrainian soldiers are regularly. But certainly for now, it seems like this is a relatively limited investment of Ukraine's resources, and that especially the political impact of this, I mean, embarrassing Russia and showing the international community that Russia isn't as predominant and that Ukraine can still take everyone's surprise and change the kind of course of the dynamic of this war. I think that certainly for now seems like it's a good investment. Whether or not Ukraine is going to send more troops in and try and dig in and hold more territory there, we don't know yet. But certainly, the Ukrainians are also keeping to this very tight-lipped stance. This is uncharacteristic. Last year when we had the counteroffensive, we had lots of talk from the Ukrainian leadership, and I think they regret that now, that they think that basically put the expectations on that counteroffensive too high. So this year you're seeing totally the opposite. Basically nothing being said, very kind of indirect pronouncements, if at all, and they're letting the facts speak for themselves.
The latest there from DW correspondents Nick Connolly and Janina Semenova.
Well, I'm joined now by Christopher Morris. He's a military and security expert at the University of Portsmouth in England. Mr. Morris, it's good to have you with us on this Friday. So this is day 4 of this Ukrainian incursion into Russia. Where do you see things going from here?
That's a very interesting question. Now, the Ukrainian side is keeping its cards incredibly close to their chest about this one. They're, like you can see with their president, barely even alluding to what is going on. So their long-term plan in the area, that at this moment is uncertain. I will stress that what they've been able to achieve so far is fairly incredible. So it kind of blows away any of their past border incursions, and by most indications,
why do you say it's incredible? Why do you say it's incredible, Mr. Morris?
Well, at this current juncture, and I myself and many other analysts have said before that fighting on the front lines in the south at the moment, it's not going very well for Ukraine. Now, they can either commit to this game or they can change things up. Now, what they've been able to do with their incursion into Kursk is change things up. Russia is now on the back foot, it's on the hoof, and it is in a position that, at least for the short to mid-term, Ukraine is in a position to exploit their movements. So it's very positive from the Ukrainian side. More long-term, there might be some issues.
And yeah, that was my next question. I mean, is this sustainable? I mean, does the Ukrainian military, do they have the manpower to keep this going in the Kursk region?
Of course, like I said, they're certainly not going to have the resources to maintain a long-term presence inside of Russia, not least because as time moves on, Russia is able to effectively mobilize its internal military resources, in particular the hundreds of thousands of conscripts that have to fight back this incursion. What the Ukrainians are doing at the moment, however, is forcing Russia to maneuver and effectively to panic. And as a result, it's on the hoof, it's in the open, and it's able to inflict some fairly severe casualties on maneuvering Russian forces.
What about the thinking that Ukraine is trying to grab some Russian territory to have that basically as a card that it can play at the negotiating table? And the fact, as you were saying, the fact that this strategy is not sustainable, doesn't it tell us that perhaps the Ukrainians are expecting to have to sit down at the negotiating table sooner rather than later?
There are, I suppose, 3 possible directions that this could go in. So first of all, they have set a main objective for the Russian military that they cannot afford to ignore. They need to get that territory back if they're going to, maintain any kind of face whatsoever. Secondarily, this is a major PR humiliation for Putin and his allies. Thirdly, as you've alluded to there is the possibility that should this war go to the bargaining table, now, Ukraine has an undeniable card in their hand now, in that they have seized a significant portion of Russian territory. Could be a factor in an exchange, could be a factor in a negotiation.
And do you get this sense, Mr. Morris, that the Ukrainians are acting on the assumption that no matter what happens in the U.S. presidential election in November, for example, no matter what happens, support from the West is waning, and that is not going to change?
Unfortunately, that does seem to be an undeniable element of the conflict. Like across Europe and in particular the US, there are a lot of regimes asking questions about their own domestic situation and, of course, the logic of continuing this war indefinitely. Like, as a major question mark hanging over the heads of the world's leaders, like, it's something that I think states are increasingly going to be looking to resolve. Now, this could factor into the pressure that is placed on the Ukrainian regime to bring things to the bargaining table in the near future. Again, I don't think there's a clear answer in this response, but yeah, like, the cards are certainly stacking up. And, you know, a negotiation or a negotiated settlement is not as unforeseeable today as it was a year ago.
Yes, very good point. Christopher Morris with the University of Portsmouth in England, we appreciate your time and your analysis tonight. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
In eastern Ukraine, at least 11 people have been killed and 44 wounded in an attack on a supermarket. Officials say a Russian missile struck the store in the town of Kostiantynivka. It's about 13 kilometers from active combat lines in the region of Donetsk. Ukrainian-held areas regularly come under Russian shelling and airstrikes.